polls have become a way of life in reporting on the political scene.
Once I counted over 15 national news organizations and research organizations that asked a monthly, do you approve or disapprove of the president? So it's something that we continuously monitor.
In the 19th century, early 20th century, when someone ran for the presidency, you adopted a platform at the beginning of the political campaign. And more or less you stuck to it throughout the whole campaign. And one of the reasons you stuck to it, there was no reason to change it. You didn't know whether people were responding to it positively or negatively. You could see whether you got big crowds at rallies, but that isn't a really good measure. And so you just didn't change.
Really not until Theodore Roosevelt became president do we have presidents self-consciously and the media and watching them thinking about the president as someone who speaks to the public directly. And of course, he's attributed the phrase the bully pulpit, and every president since then has at times seen this as a resource. And every modern chief executive has to pay attention to public opinion and to cultivating public opinion.
Nixon had basically 3 separate polling operations that he had. He apparently saw the usefulness of polling and governing in the following sense. One is, it was a way for him to see to what extent he was effective at persuading and influencing the public on things he wanted to do, like establishing better relations with China. He basically did polling to see to what extent that the public would be, in the end, would attempt to thwart things that he would try to do. The analogy here would be looking for, red lights or green lights with respect to proceeding further on particular kinds of issues. Jimmy Carter was the first president who had a campaign pollster that he basically brought with him into the White House. What was new was not so much he was using the information about public opinion, but that it became apparent and visible that the president had a pollster, and that was Patrick Goodell. And then Clinton, most visibly of all, sense was that Clinton really didn't do anything without taking a poll or convening a focus group. And as a result of that, it was sort of anticipated that Clinton was tailoring his policies in response to public opinion. That really wasn't the case. The polls were not being used for purposes of responding to public opinion, but rather for purposes of figuring out the best way to lead, persuade, or manipulate the public based on information obtained from the opinion polls.
The other dilemma politicians face is the extent to which public opinion should influence their decisions. Many issues are just not on the public's radar screen. And when they are, more often than not, opinion is divided.
The reason why, as citizens, we hire our representatives and ultimately our government is that they're supposed to not only just do what we happen to think at the moment, but they're supposed to represent us by being more thoughtful about our interests and by thinking about the complexities of the problem. When the American public becomes fixed on something, or heated up about a topic, they then can often excite their representatives, whether members of the House or members of the Senate, or ultimately members of the administration, or indeed even the president. So one looks at American involvement in Kosovo or Haiti or Bosnia. Certainly the Clinton administration would say, well, Americans were saying that we should do something about this problem.
It's not always the case that the public knows best what it should be doing, what the nation should be doing, and the normal assumption is that political leaders know better than the public. On the other hand, that creates tensions in the sense that if political leaders do what they want, they may not do what the public wants them to do.
To best represent my state of Vermont, my own conscience and principles I have stood for my whole life, I will leave the Republican Party and become an independent.
The public doesn't want a political leader who just follows public opinion. They want a leader who's a leader. The next day, the public doesn't want a leader who ignores public opinion, who goes off on his or her own. And in some sense, they're right, that, a government is supposed to be responsive, but a government is supposed to govern. And so you get these mixed feelings in a variety of areas.
But often, public opinion does direct government toward a goal, even if it can't provide a detailed plan. The Vietnam conflict is a case in point.
It's possible to say that public attitudes toward the Vietnam War were very important. That is, in order for the United States to get involved in the war in Vietnam as heavily as it did, it required that the the Johnson administration be able to mobilize public support, which it was able to do, so that the escalation that occurred during the beginning of the war was actually supported by the public. By the same token, after the Tet Offensive, the public began to shift against the war as a result of changing realities, changing debates about the war, and in the end, the withdrawal of troops from Vietnam could be shown to be consistent with parallel trends in public support for troop withdrawal. So there are lots of instances where we can actually show that public policy did in fact follow public opinion.
Politics is about framing choices that you want people to think between programs, between courses of action, and you can get much more sophisticated and better at your argument if you use the science of public opinion polling to measure out what people are really concerned about.
The overall behavior and characteristic of public opinion itself hasn't changed in terms of it being basically stable and responsive to new information. The public as a collective pays attention to what goes on in politics on salient issues, that as new information is available to them, they respond in accord with that information. When we talk about the rational public, we talk about a public that really is sensitive overall to new information, to the big messages that occur in the political process.
If you look back at what the framers were trying to achieve, whether in the debates at the Constitutional Convention or in the Federalist Papers, there's a real emphasis by Madison and his colleagues on representation of the variety of interests in society. And there was an abiding faith that the best republic is one in which the variety of interest all participated in the outcome.
What we bank on in our political system is that political leaders will in fact attempt to do what really is in the nation's interest, rather than serving certain segments of the nation that really don't have the nation's interests in mind. And so there really is a delicate balance, kind of tension there between responding to public opinion versus doing what's in the nation's interest.